Crescendo, your program for the performing arts. Crescendo is a production of international artists in New York City and Seattle, Washington. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Crescendo. This week we are very fortunate to have a world-famous harper with us. Usually you hear us talk about harpists, but in this particular case, it is indeed a harper for two reasons. One, because Harper plays folk harp, and secondly, because that's his name as well. So we welcome you to Crescendo, Harper.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to hearing the wonderful music and the stories that you're going to tell us about that music.
Thanks so much. So there are a couple of things that I'd like to tell you about this harp, and some of the things that make the difference between a harpist and a harper. This is a 26-string harp. Its lowest note is 1 octave below middle C, and it comes up here a couple and a half octaves above that. And unlike the big harps in the orchestra, it doesn't have any pedals. It has levers for each of these strings. So for instance, if I want to play a C, I leave the lever where it is. If I want to play a C sharp, I put up that lever for that string, and that gives me a C sharp. So for each octave, I can have the harp tuned differently, unlike the pedal harp, where if I move a pedal, C pedal to C sharp, all of the C's on the instrument go to C sharp at once. So in one sense, it's a little more versatile. In another sense, it's a little more work, because you have to move each one individually. One of the things that makes a small harp a lot of fun is that you can just pick it up and take it places. This harp weighs about the same amount as solidly built, I should say, guitar, and it's really easy to take it outside, take it to hospitals and play in there. It's a really great size for the living room, for playing on boats, for instance. I've even played this on trains, on airplanes, all kinds of fun places you can take a small harp. The inspiration for this next tune came from spending some time in a summer afternoon out in a big city park. And I was looking around, and I had my book, and I had my bottle of water, and everything was fine. And I was noticing that there were all these little groups of people, and quite a few of them had somebody playing a guitar. Often I noticed it was just, a fellow with his guitar and his sweetie, and he was serenading her. And I thought, why don't we see more harps out here doing that? We should have at least as many harps in the park on a summer day as we have guitars. That should be some kind of goal for someone. The more I thought about it, the more I thought, there's an opportunity here to even go one further than a guitar can go. If I write a piece for just one hand on the harp, then my other hand can actually be holding my sweetie's hand at the same time. And a guitar player can't do that. So this is a piece that I wrote. It's called Just You. Next I'd like to play one of my own tunes. This one has a little bit of an interesting story behind it. I grew up on an island in southeast Alaska, and one of the things I really liked about living on an island is that if you're going to go anywhere, you either have to take a boat or you have to fly. And if the weather's bad, you're definitely taking a boat. When I first moved to this area, to Puget Sound, I lived for a number of years on Whidbey Island. One of the things, again, I enjoyed was being on an island and having water all the way around. I was working there at my studio on Whidbey Island and recording over in Port Townsend, which meant if I was going to the recording studio, I was taking a boat back and forth. Well, the Keystone Ferry is the name of the ferry crossing from Whidbey Island to Port Townsend, and it's a rather treacherous crossing if the weather is rough or if the tides are strong. Often they'll actually shut down the ferry crossing because the harbor is too treacherous to get into in rough weather. Well, like any job, recording is sometimes you have really good days and sometimes you really don't. And for this particular album I was working on, I was having a lot of trouble in the recording studio. I was just not able to get the sound and the feeling that I was after. I was very frustrated. I was on my way home. It was a very stormy afternoon. Got onto the ferry. Everyone was kind of huddled in the cabin because the weather was rough and the seas were rough and the tide was strong and the wind was strong and the boat was kind of shuddering through the crossing. And I was out on the bow, because when I'm in that kind of a mood, that's where I want to be. And I'm standing out there and I'm thinking, you know, this is just not working for me very well this day that I've had. And all of a sudden this gray seagull just kind of appears and is floating off the port bow. And I'm looking up at it, and here's, you know, the storm is going everywhere, the wind and the waves crashing around, the boat's shuddering, car alarms are going off, and here's this bird just hovering here. And I'm looking at it, and it's looking at me, and I hear this voice in my head. Is there anything going wrong here? This is just fine. Things are just the way they ought to be. Then I thought, all right, I get the message. So I got home, took out my harp, sat down and said, let's have the storm and the boat in this hand. And let's have the bird in this hand, and let's see what we can do. So I started work, and several days of composition work later, I had a tune. This is called Skua. So this is a different kind of harp completely. This is called a cross-strung harp. One of the reasons that this kind of harp exists is so that you can have half steps without having to use the levers. Remember I talked a little bit about the levers. If I wanted a C sharp, then I had to move the lever for that string to get the C sharp. With the cross-strung harp, here's middle C. If I want C sharp, I play the C sharp string. So I don't have levers, I don't have pedals at all, and I have the full chromatic scale like a keyboard. Now, this is not a brand new design of harp. The earliest record we have for sure of a cross-strung harp comes from Spain, from Madrid, in the last decade of the 1500s, 1596 I believe it was. A receipt from a harp builder for the Royal Chapel, building a harp with 2 rows of strings called the arpa de dos órdenes. In contemporary writings of the time, it's described as being about the height of a person, and its strings resemble a weaver's loom. They talk about the strings not being, like an ordinary harp, but being all kind of tangled up together. So the reason the strings cross, rather than just having 2 sets that are like this, is that by having them cross, you can have both hands play both sets. For instance, here's our C. In the left hand, the C string is below the line of crossing. Here's the line where the strings cross, right here. The C is down here in the left hand. The same string is up here in the right hand. If I want the C sharp, it's up in the left hand and down in the right. So for the D, D sharp, down for E, up for E, you get the idea. It's sort of like Alice in the Looking Glass right here. If one hand goes up, the other hand is going to go down. But the advantage is that you can play in every key without having to move pedals or flip levers, and you can do it all on a harp that weighs less than 25 pounds, which is an advantage too, if you have to take your harp anywhere. So I'd like to start by playing you a very simple piece. You've probably heard it before. This is Bach's C major prelude to the Well-Tempered Clavier. If you've heard it sung, you might have heard a soprano or somebody singing Ave Maria over the top of it. The Ave Maria part came almost 200 years later. Here's the piece just as Bach wrote it. going back to the traditional music repertoire, here's a tune that comes from Finland. It's called Tuolon mun kultani. It's a love song. One of the things that makes this song meaningful is to know a little bit about its historical background. For many, many years, anytime there was a very skilled craftsperson in Finland, they would be basically kidnapped and taken to work at the court of the Russian Tsar. This is a song that is sung by one of the people whose sweethearts has been taken to work at the court of the Tsar. The woman is singing, she calls her beloved her little bird, and she says, please don't take the sound of my little bird from me. Don't let me be here by myself in the winter alone. It's a very beautiful song. Tuol on kultani. It's a gorgeous melody, and what I've done to it is to give it a setting that shows off a little bit of the chromatic ability of the cross-drum harp. Here's another piece that I wrote. Many years ago, I knew somebody who was an accomplished fingerstyle guitar player. His name was Jan, and he discovered, as many musicians do, that the more skilled you become and the more popular you become, the less you are at home. And after being on the road for quite a while, I was talking to him one day and I said, so what do you think you'd like to be doing, 5 years from now or 10 years from now or something? Do you want to be on the road this much? And he said, no, what I'd really like to do is move out to the country somewhere and set up a B&B, bed and breakfast. I said, why a bed and breakfast? He said, well, that way people can come to me and I don't have to go to them. I said, what would you call it? He said, I would call it the Seldom Inn. So here's a tune that I wrote thinking about my friend Jan, and it's got kind of a little guitar sort of a feeling to it, and it's called the Seldom Inn.
Harper, thank you so much for being on Crescendo today. It has really been educational and beautiful.
Thanks so much.
For those of you who would like to hear more of Harper's music, we ask you to visit his website. If you look across the bottom of the screen now, you will see his website address. Harper is also going to be playing a concert in Seattle coming up at the end of October on the 26th, Sunday evening, at Dusty Strings. Dusty Strings is our local harp manufacturer, and we will certainly be there to see you, and we invite the entire television audience to do the same.
Come on over.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Crescendo. We hope to see you next time.